All right, here we go. OverDrive off and running. TSN 1050 on the TSN app, your home smart speaker, and up on TSN 4. Bryan Hayes and Frankie Corrado in studio. How we feeling this afternoon, Frankie?
Lots going on, man. Lots going on. What a Monday we got.
I'm feeling great today for many different reasons. Luke Wilson will be in studio in about an hour. Luke will be in here representing Timo and Wilson. I will be here representing Hayes and Bro, because we are marching towards the Christmas miracle. A lot of people are buzzing about that. And we got a football game tonight where no one knows who's playing.
Yeah.
And as a result, it's really difficult to get a read on because I don't think Geno Smith is going to play. I'm not sure if Jalen Hurts is going to play. Both teams coming off tough schedules, tough losses. Big game tonight in Seattle, so we'll get to that. Raptors in action tonight. The Leafs are off until tomorrow. The Leafs are coming off a doozy on Saturday. And yet, the news of the day, certainly in the country, is DJ Smith has been let go in Ottawa.
Yeah.
And nobody's surprised by this.
No.
Like, not even an ounce of surprise by anyone. I'm sure DJ Smith, not at all surprised. Although he coached the practice this morning and then spoke with the media, which I find a bit strange and somewhat unfair. It's not the end of the world.
No, it's a little bizarre.
It's bizarre.
Just they let Davis Payne go as well, the other assistant. Just let Jack run the practice today. You knew that was coming. I did that game last night. I was doing the panel. Noodles was calling it. Like that, there was a feeling going into that game that this could get out of hand, and right away it does. Like Jack Eichel scores first shot of the game. And you're like, okay, here we go. It's happening.
Yeah.
And then finally today you don't wake up, but you see the news this afternoon. It's long overdue. DJ's a good coach. He's a good guy. But at some point, like, everything kind of runs its course. Like, head coaches in the NHL right now just don't have a very long shelf life. And he had a pretty long one for a team that never really accomplished anything.
Yeah, that's the truth. Is at some point it becomes almost a mercy firing. You know, it was kind of a Brandon Staley situation, not as acute as Chargers Raiders, but an accumulation of it where the fan base has been chanting for it really since opening night, which is tough. You keep losing. They've been on this road trip now for 3 games. They've gone 0-3. You've seen other teams get new coach bumps, like in St. Louis where they were a few nights ago. And Ottawa ended up losing. And DJ Smith kept coming out, I don't think doing himself any favors, almost after every game and saying the same thing. Like, we have to play differently. Well, that's the job of the coach to implement that new system or mentality and get the players to buy in. So, long overdue. Again, I don't think this will change anything for the Sens. I think they're too deep into the season. They've dug themselves too deep of a hole. I'm a bit surprised Jacques Martin is willing to get behind the bench again. Like, he hasn't coached in quite some time.
Not as a head coach.
Not as a head coach.
He was last time he was around, he was the assistant in Pittsburgh. He was running the D. And I was there with Jacques. By the way, the first thing they're going to have to implement in Ottawa for Jacques is post-game sushi, because as soon as that buzzer goes, he makes a beeline for like the lounge area and goes bare hand into the sushi, grabs a few into the coach's
You're
office.
kidding me.
That's his routine.
Like 82 times a year.
Dude.
He has sushi right after the game.
Buzzer, sushi, hand into the coach's office.
Okay. Wow.
That is the first thing they will be implementing there. But he's not yet. Like, he's 71.
That's
he's
what
gonna
I'm
be
saying.
Stepping behind the bench. Like, it's changed a lot. The league has changed a lot. Even in the last, 5 to 6 years, it's changed a lot.
That's the question if you're the Ottawa Senators. He represents a better era for them. Still a disappointing one to an extent, Battle of Ontario and all that. But still, he did a lot of winning. In his time as the head coach, late 90s, early 2000s, like a lot of winning in Ottawa. Represents, again, a very fond era, I'm sure, in that marketplace. But will modern players respond to him? Like that is the ultimate question. And obviously, the new owner, Steve Staios, the new president of hockey operations, I think, believe they had to do something. Because I was talking about this on Friday. We asked Johnny, like, how far away are we from them taking on this look as if they're punting on the season in Ottawa? Because it felt like it, because I could understand it, too. If you're a new owner and a new man in charge in Steve Staios, you kind of want to take some time to see what's under the hood. Like, what do we have here in the system? Who are these players? These are not their players. What do they have in the minors? What do they have coming up in junior ranks, et cetera? And get a read on kind of what is here. And yet, it's been an incredibly chaotic start to a tenure for a new owner.
And that's
like, what a scene.
No kidding. Think about all he's had to go through, him and Staios already. And punting on the season is not exactly off the table. This is just a mercy fire for a guy that was getting a lot of vitriol from the fan base. I think that's one of the things that Andlauer and Staios really had to keep in mind here as they made this decision. Ideally, they would have wanted to hire a general manager first, have that in place, and then hire a head coach, because the big buzzword in Ottawa is stability. The organization needs stability. It's lacked it for so long. Now's the chance for them to do it. But with the way things went, their hand was kind of forced here to say, we actually have to do something.
Yeah.
And Jacques Martin might not be the long-term solution. Like, the long-term solution might still be, let this year play out. They have to play at Sam Cicerello sent a note. They got to play at a 650 clip winning percentage in order to give themselves a chance at the playoffs. Not easy to do for a team that's going to have to flip the switch like that, but it might just be like, Jacques, see what we got here, give us a little bit of a forensic audit, and then we're going to kind of make a decision here. If we want to go with someone new, you'll slide back to that senior advisor role next year.
Well, exactly. And I think, when they brought in Jacques Martin, it was very public that he was in as an advisor, but very public, which in retrospect obviously was not a good sign if you're DJ Smith, because I think effectively what he was doing was taking notes and letting ownership and management know, this is what I'm seeing here. And it wasn't about the players. It was likely about DJ Smith. This is what I'm picking up on coaching habits, practice habits, what these guys are doing during the game, how they're adjusting on the fly, how the players are responding to them. And, that's why, ultimately you had to make a move. That's why you insert a guy like Martin to cool things down a little bit. Obviously, you hope it has a positive effect on this team. But, you can't – it's a bad look for a new owner, a tenured owner, to make a coach walk the plank publicly every day.
Yeah.
And that's what DJ Smith was doing. And this is a first impression for Andlauer. This
fan
is
base
with
too.
the fan base too. So if you look as if you're mailing in a season or you're complacent, that's not good for business. No. Because again, you can make sense of why Andlauer and Staios would say, we want to just get to the end of the year and reshuffle some things. They just got here. The fans did not. The fans have been riding this wave in Ottawa for years,
and
it's been ugly, and it's incredibly disappointing. And when you consider what was here that this new owner inherited, players that are signed long-term for at least 4 more years, Tkachuk, Stützle, Norris, Batherson, Sanderson, Shabbat, Zub, Korpisalo. That's basically in the cap era how it works. You have 4 forwards, 3 defensemen, and a starting goalie. Everything else can be flexible. Yep. And there are other guys in there like Chikrin and a couple of other guys who you would look at and say, okay, they're probably committed to them, right? Pinto when he returns and they figure that out. They probably want him to be a part of the future. Ridley, Gregg, etc. But in terms of Dorian and previous ownership, you've walked in to Tkachuk, Stützle, Norris, Batherson, Sanderson, Shabbat, Zub, Korpisalo, all locked up long term.
You know what?
So what are you going to do with that?
Your hands are tied. That's who you have. But you know what I think really pushed this over the edge most recently is that guys like Sanderson and Stützle, you're watching them play and you're like, that's not you.
That happens.
That's that. So when you see those guys' games start to slip, in a way, you have to protect those guys as much as you can because, like you just made the point, those guys are locked up long-term. They're going to be part of the team. And when you see those young players get put in situations where their game's not going well, the team can't win, it becomes a bad environment as far as the on-ice product goes, that's when you have to make the change, man. You're almost just protecting your guys in a way, and it makes sense.
Yeah, well, exactly. I mean, you got a scenario here where those are players that you've invested in as an organization, regardless of who the owner was or the GM was. That's your team. Those are the guys you need to protect and need to cultivate. And the players have to take onus here too, right? They all got paid, and this is what's, I'm sure, scary for Staios and Andlauer is none of them are playing for new contracts. None of them are desperate. None of them know how to win yet in the NHL. There's a lot of talent there. But is it the right ingredients?
Yeah.
Are they the right players? Is it the right mix? Or was it a previous administration that they were all their players and they said, screw it, we're going to make it easy on ourselves and give you all deals?
Yeah.
And it's not like any of them that I can see are drastically overpaid, but they're well compensated. It's not as if these guys are on long-term deals at $3 or $4 million, Like, Shabbat's getting paid. Sanderson's getting paid.
Dude, and those
Stutzler and
guys-
Kachuk are getting paid.
And they didn't have to like go through the whole negotiation where it's like, hey, we're going to need you to bridge a year, or we're going to try and squeeze you here.
Just here you go.
The only guy that got squeezed was Pinto. Everyone else got their 8-year deal locked up with not a lot of contention around it. So there is something to be said for that. Like, where's that internal battle level within the players? But like, if you pay attention to the Ottawa fan base, there's a lot of fans that they were sour at the fact that DJ never really shows a lot of emotion behind the bench. He's never yelling and screaming or looking like he's really upset at his players. Don't expect that from Jacques Martin.
No, exactly.
He's not going to be yelling and screaming and throwing things. He's got the same kind of disposition as DJ Smith. That's not going to change.
Very stoic.
Yeah.
Very stoic behind the bench. Exactly. Now, we'll see who the next coach is going to be. It's not going to be Martin long term. I can't imagine, unless a miracle happens, like Rick Bowness in Dallas, remember that?
Yeah,
Where, like, if Martin drags him into the playoffs, they do something and he wants to stick around, then I would guess they probably would bring him back.
Yeah.
But you got Craig Berube, who's out there, Dean Evason's out there, Jay Woodcroft out there, and Ottawa decided not to bring any of them in.
Yeah.
So this is about just getting away from DJ Smith, trying to reset and take it from there. They're going to push that decision down the road. But what is amazing about this is how much coaching turnover we've seen in the league, but furthermore in the country.
Yeah.
Where I was looking it up because I was curious. I'm like, I'm pretty sure, in fact, I know now that Sheldon Keefe is the longest tenured Canadian coach going. And he was hired in November of 2019. And there it is up on TSN4. Not only is he the longest tenured, he's the longest tenured by like 2.5 years. Where Sheldon Keefe was hired November 20th, 2019. Then it was Marty St. Louis originally on an interim basis, February of 22. Then Rick Bowness, July of 22 in Winnipeg. Rick Tocchet, January of 23 in Vancouver. Chris Knobloch, November of 23 in Edmonton. Ryan Huska, June of 23 in Calgary. And now Jacques Martin comes in. So you have 4 new coaches in this calendar year in Vancouver, Edmonton, Calgary, and Ottawa. And 6 of the 7 have had new coaches or coaching turnover in the last year and a half.
Pretty crazy.
It's wild what's going on up here.
Well, and think about the Montreal Canadiens went to the Stanley Cup final. Right. Like,
with Ducharme.
Yeah, with Ducharme. That wasn't that long ago.
No.
Right? Like, that's specific to a Canadian team, and Craig Berube won a Stanley Cup not that long ago, and he got fired.
Right.
So, I don't know, man. Like, with the players being locked up the way they are, you can only do so much, so you shuffle around coaches, and the Canadian coaching scene is wild. And listen, I like DJ Smith. I have a lot of time for him. He was the assistant in Toronto.
Yep.
But isn't it strange that Babcock got fired after a game in Vegas going to Arizona?
Mm-hmm.
Now DJ Smith, his old assistant in Toronto, got fired after a game in Vegas going to Arizona.
Right.
I don't know what the symbolism there. It's just a very strange,
bad trip.
Very strange set of circumstances.
It's a tough trip. And it's almost as if the owner's like, I can't believe this expansion team keeps doing this to us. Like Vegas is just killing the league.
Yeah.
They're winning cups, going to cup finals. They're the crown jewel of the NHL, and here's these Canadian markets who have been around forever, selling tickets forever, worth a fortune. They're like, we can't keep up with these guys. We got to move on.
If you're a coach and your team is not playing well, and you see Vegas
run for your life,
schedule, run for your life.
Something to chew on is brought to you by Boston Pizza, Canada's favorite sports bar. From touchdowns to tie bites and puck drops to pizza, BP's elite lineup of apps, wings, and ice cold beer is always dialed in for game time. Hustle into your local BP. Tonight, we're asking, what do you believe is the main reason for all of the turnover in terms of head coaches across the Canadian markets? And the options on the poll at OverDrive 1050 on Twitter: subpar coaching. So you just hired the wrong guys. You didn't have good coaches, and as a result, they didn't keep their jobs. Roster construction, media fan pressure, or other, and you can write in what that other might be. And I'm not surprised by this. There's a battle ongoing. It's roster construction has 45% of the vote, 22% subpar coaching, 27% media fan pressure. It's probably a combination of all of them. But I think ultimately it comes down, for me, if I had to choose one, it would be roster construction. It's that these teams are not good enough, that the Canadian markets, and COVID factored into that.
Yeah.
But you're so quick to hand money out. You're obsessed with the star players. You build around star players, and then the winning doesn't happen, and then it all starts to unravel from there. And when you have contracts built in the way that they're built in, we just referenced Ottawa. Ottawa hasn't won a thing. They have all these guys who have long-term deals. Your hands are tied. if you want to make a culture-changing move, you'd probably like to remove a player or two and make a big, bold trade. You can't do it. So really, your only option is to fire the coach.
Well, because who's going to give you their $8 million player for your $8 million player? Chances are the other team's pretty happy with the guy that they got.
Right.
So how are you going to make that transaction happen? And the other thing a coach always has over you is ice time, right? They can limit your ice time. But when you're in a situation like DJ was, where the team is desperate, and like last night's game, they had an AHL bottom six because Matthew Joseph is out and Tarasenko wasn't playing for personal reasons. Who's he supposed to put on the ice in order to try and win that game? Of course, he's just going to keep going back to his guys, and they make mistakes, but he kind of has to, or else he's going to throw out his third and fourth line, and he's going to lose 8-2. So I don't know what the answer is there as far as ice time goes, but the salary cap, not being able to carry 23 guys because you're jammed against the cap, like that doesn't help the coaches when they try and manage things.
Yeah, and then it gets so loud up here where that is you can't allow it to fade up here like you can in other markets.
Yeah.
There's a lot of American markets where you can't allow it to fade either. Right? In Minnesota, that's a big hockey market. Dean Evison had to go. St. Louis, obviously, they decided we have to move on here from a guy that the fans really like, but it's loud enough. But there are markets where the dark periods are still quiet. The dark periods up here are as loud as you can get in pro sports.
Yeah.
Like if you're losing and you have an accumulation of losing, it gets incredibly loud. And also a different variation of losing where you can bring Sheldon Keefe into this. Keefe during the regular season is one of the winningest coaches in NHL history. But when they lose in the playoffs, that's the focus for either running him out of town or bringing up his resume or suggesting you need change. It's never about the regular season.
No.
And it shouldn't be because of what he continues to do. Look what happened on Saturday night where I would think Sheldon must have been pretty happy with his group. And Kyle Dubas, conversely, could not have been any more mortified with his group. I couldn't believe how awful Pittsburgh was.
No, I don't know about you, but I like watching that for through the lens of Kyle Dubas, and they were not shy to show him, which I thought was
it was a bit gratuitous.
They were
a little bit over the top.
They were showing him a lot
more than Taylor Swift gets.
Literally
more than Taylor Swift.
And there's a portion of the fan base who that was their Christmas.
Yes.
Watching Kyle Dubas in that suite, that was their Christmas with the red face and on the verge of being emotional. And then there's a portion of the fan base that felt bad for him watching that. I got to be honest with you. For your team to go out there in the city that you're returning to where it was very noisy upon your exit and to do that, I felt bad for the guy. I felt bad for him watching that with the way that whole thing went down. And I think the person who would be the most pissed off would be the captain, Sidney Crosby. I think.
Yeah, I didn't notice it a lot on Saturday night.
No, but I think he would be furious at the way that went down on a Saturday night in Toronto.
I think you should be. It was embarrassing.
Yeah.
I mean, let's call it what it was. If you're Pittsburgh and you're Sid, it's hockey night. You understand the meaning of that. You're not going to have many left. How many more does Sid have on a Saturday night in Toronto? You can't guarantee they're coming up in the future.
Yeah.
If Pittsburgh takes a dive, are they going to try to schedule games on a Saturday night with Pitt? I would think they probably will. But it's a big game. It's a big market. He understands the history. He would get Dubas. Other players may not care as much. I think Sid's a hockey nerd. He gets that. He understands relationships. And yet the Leafs were so dominant. You say this a lot of times tongue-in-cheek. Hey, it could have been 10-0. It probably should have been 10-0.
Yeah, seriously.
They had so many breakaways and odd man rushes and hitting posts, and it was crazy. And there is an element of bearing the lead because Martin Jones had a shutout. And that is a big story for this team.
It is.
That he did get peppered with some shots. A lot of it was shot effect stuff. The game's so out of hand. The Leafs are kind of mailing it in by the third period. But he did what he had to do. And that's two big wins against what we thought would be two good teams, the Rangers earlier in the week and then Pittsburgh on Saturday. But with Dubas, he got his pound of flesh when Pittsburgh beat the Leafs in Pitt. So it's not as if the Leafs have dummied them twice.
Yep.
And I don't pity Kyle. If anything, I kind of look at Kyle and I'm impressed with what he's managed to do throughout his hockey life and his hockey career. When you consider this is a guy that grew up around the Greyhounds, the famous story was the water boy, grew up around them, hung around them long enough to the point where he was the GM, didn't play for the team, but was the GM, then got to Toronto, then moved Lou Lamoriello out to insert he didn't literally fire Lou, but he takes over for Lou. Then clearly by the end, it seems pretty obvious that he and Shanahan were butting heads. and he's moved up to president of hockey operations in Pittsburgh. Like, it's an incredible resume that he's built, and he's not even 40.
No, he's the president, and he's making a lot of money.
Yes.
So I think people
he made his bed. He wanted to go down there.
Exactly, and he did the whole press conference, and he had the thing about, I'm not going to show up in 2 weeks, and a lot of people found that to be disingenuous, and that's totally fair because of the way that whole thing played out. But yeah, he's a young guy. He's the president. He's making just as much as Shanahan. He's
done
cards,
pretty well.
Yes, he played his cards very well to get where he's at, and he's going to have to make some decisions there at some point because I think doomsday for that organization is probably creeping up faster than anyone. Well, than maybe he would have thought. But you know what? You know what I took out of that game on Saturday? And Matthews doesn't play. Brody doesn't play. Early in the game, Matthew Knies scores that beautiful goal. Then he doesn't stop from there. He gets into a fight. Then he gets the beautiful assist. Then Nick Robertson gets the assist. Then Bobby McMahon scores. And I start to think, like, when was the last time we saw the influx of youth on this team really carry the mail? Not just a game, but like a little period of time. Like the last really wave of youth is the core group now. Matthews, Marner, Nylander. That's that last wave. And this next wave is not going to be as high-end skill as those guys. But think about the teams that have done really well, whether it's Tampa, whether it's Colorado, whether it's Boston. It's like they've had that next wave of guys, maybe a tier 2, tier 3 kind of talent level that really found a way to be impactful in the lineup at cheap contracts. And I saw that on Saturday. I'm like, man, that's great. We never see that, and we never talk about that. 3 young players who really had a big part in winning that game without the best player on the team playing.
Yep, and it's absolutely necessary. It's a great point. Like the next wave will hopefully be for the Leafs, Fraser Minten, Easton Cowan, among others. Now it's probably 2-3 years down the road. But if you want to be a serious operation, you have to consistently insert youth, and they have to have an impact. And I thought what Knies brought in particular, that's the kind of stuff that can make you a fan favorite quick in this town. You're a big boy that uses your body, will drop the gloves, score some goals. Because another part of it that I think stood out to me last night or on Saturday night was the veterans that they brought in are still in their prime and capable of bringing something. Like there was a time here where it was like, all right, you got to bring in Spezza. You know, bring in Giordano. Marlowe's coming up to help. Joe Thornton. That guy's Max Domi now, and he's 27 years old.
Yeah.
And Tyler Bertuzzi, who's 28, I believe. Like, in other words, veteran guys, I think they have big roles in the room. I think what Knies just did there for Domi speaks a lot to what Domi's already done here. Where I was in a building when Vancouver was here on a Saturday night, and Nick Robertson got absolutely crushed. And I can't remember who threw the hit.
Ian Cole.
Yes, it was Cole. And Domi immediately dropped his gloves and fought for him. And I think what that was, Domi was like, that's my guy. He's a kid. He's coming up. He's on my wing. And I'm gonna fight for him. And there's Knies, who doesn't have a history with Max Domi that I'm aware of. I know Max was in the desert, maybe knew him a little bit. Hasn't really shared a line with Max Domi. And Domi got hit. It wasn't an egregious like trucking or anything. And Knies is like, screw it. I'm going to step up for my guy here.
Yeah.
And that's another element to like where this team needed to go, where instead of the 40-year-old that you're like, man, we're hoping we're getting something out of this guy.
Yep.
It's the 27-year-old that you're like, he is supplying something. I thought Max Domi was phenomenal on Saturday night.
Well, we always talked about it with the older guys. It's like this babysitter guy who's he's got to show the young guys the ropes. Those guys know the ropes now. The keys have been handed over to them. Now it's up to them to empower everyone around them and say, listen, like establish something. This is how we do things here. We're trying to change the way we do things. We're trying to get over the hump here. We're going to do things a certain way. So like it's up to everyone to fall in line. But Matthew Knies, like when you get to see like the physicality mixed with the explosive speed and the hands, you're like, man, that could be a pretty dangerous player.
Guy.
Like that's a guy you want to have that not a lot of teams have too many of those guys.
Right.
And they're hard to acquire.
They're very difficult to acquire, and you got them on the cheap here.
Yes.
Right? Like this is, I guess did they burn a year last year? I think they did. I think that was the agreement of him coming out of college was we won't hold you to it. But still, they got him this year and next, and then an RFA.
Yeah.
And yeah, when you look at, like we were talking about Ottawa and the roster construction, where most teams in the cap era, you're granted like 3 or 4 forwards, maybe 3 or 4 defensemen, a starting goaltender, where a lot of resources are going to go to that. How do you fill out the rest? And now in Toronto, it's Knies, Bertuzzi, it's Domi, Yarncroke, like all guys that are secondary, but all having an impact on this team.
Yeah.
Like all supplying points and bringing something each night, and also predictable players. Like Max Domi, defensively, we can talk about. Listen, he's not the greatest defensive player in the world. There's no questioning that, and I don't think it's going to improve overnight. But you know what he does do is he's tenacious, energetic, and he shows up basically every game.
He'll come by it honestly.
Yes.
Like he knows.
And Yarncroke's very similar. Yarncroke's a good defensive player, but you know what you're getting out of him basically every night. And Knies have been impressed with his consistency too.
Yeah, especially for Knies because he missed 2 games. He had the flu bug. He comes back. He has that big performance. But even Domi, like against Columbus, he has that giveaway behind the net. Like, okay, that's one he would have liked back. And then in the game against Pittsburgh, he 2 goals directly because he was in good defensive positioning. So you see that, you're like, all right, this guy's like he's learning on the fly here, or like he cares enough that he's going to make more of an effort next game. Like those are the kinds of things you want to see.
Well, and I think again, you speak to culture, you speak to what's at stake, how good the team is, what they're trying to drive towards. That can factor into the way a guy plays as well. And I'm not saying I know for a fact players have cheated on bad teams. But players have cheated on bad teams, right? Where you get up here and you're like, there's more at stake. I'm further down the lineup. If I want to play, I better do it this way.
Yeah.
That factors in as well. All right, Chris Johnston, our TSN Hockey Insider, coming up. His take on DJ Smith, the head coach of the Ottawa Senators, being fired earlier today, and Jacques Martin taking over on an interim basis. And his take on the coaching carousel in Canada over the last couple of years. That and more coming up with CJ. Also, the Leafs in action tomorrow night. Luke Wilson in studio at 5 o'clock. Hayes and Bro are chugging. We got a Monday nighter tonight. Luke Wilson will be on the clock with that pick tonight. OverDrive continues. Frankie Corrado's in here. I'm Bryan Hayes, TSN 1050 and on TSN 4. All right, OverDrive continues. Brought to you by FanDuel, bringing you everything from the opening line to the final score. Frankie Corrado, Bryan Hayes. We're seeing some reports online that Nathan Rourke has been claimed by the New England Patriots.
What does that mean? Like, where does he report? Practice squad?
I don't think you can claim a guy off waivers and then put him right on your practice squad. I don't know that definitively, though. I would think they're going to give him a look. You know, Bailey Zappi is still Bailey Zappi. Mac Jones is still there, but
that's all Mac Jones is just there.
He's just there. He's not playing for them again. I think that's pretty clear. And maybe this is a great scenario for Rourke. If he gets up there, maybe they throw him in for a game or two. He has a chance to be around Belichick.
Yeah.
Who knows? Maybe make a little money.
Be awesome.
Yeah, we'll see. Luke Wilson in studio in about a half an hour. So DJ Smith has been fired, the Ottawa Senators coach. I would say long-term coach. It hasn't really been that long-term. It was summer of 2019. But up here, that's like an eternity.
Yeah.
Right?
That might as well be a decade.
That's basically the equivalent of a decade if you're coaching in Canada because of the amount of turnover over the years. And to chat about it, among many other things, here's our TSN Hockey Insider, Chris Johnston. CJ, not at all surprising that Ottawa decided to do this, but I guess the question would be why today as opposed to 2 weeks ago or a month ago?
Well, I think it's just a sign of how much they didn't want to do it, of really wanting to give DJ Smith some time, wanted to give him some extra resources that he probably didn't have for the first few years on the job under previous ownership. But, you see the losses piling up the way they have on this road trip. You look at their schedule, another couple road games and then finishing out with a home game December 23rd. I mean, we don't have to imagine too hard at how tough that might be coming back if DJ was still the coach and if the team didn't turn things around, starting with their game in Arizona on Tuesday. So, I think that really management felt backed into a position where they just weren't seeing any progress. Nothing was translating on the ice. I think most concerning too is the fact defensively the team has had a ton of struggles, and that way back in time was meant to be one of the positives that DJ could bring it as a coach.
So DJ Smith falls on the sword here again. Not at all surprising. The Ottawa Senators incredibly disappointing. 11-15. They've had a soft schedule, a lot of home games. Yet, with or without DJ Smith, this core is locked in, like courtesy of the previous management, previous ownership. Where I was listing off the names, a little bit earlier, where you got Stützle and Kachuk and Batherson and Norris and Zub, Shabbat, Sanderson, Korpisalo. They're all locked up long term. So I'm curious if you're getting any sense that Steve Staios, the new man in charge there, does he believe in all these guys, or is there a chance they feel like they need to change the roster at some point?
My sense is they haven't come to conclusions yet. I think that what really Staios is trying to do throughout the season, and Michael Andlauer, his boss, is get a firsthand look at what's going on behind the scenes, get to know the players and the staff and everyone else there, and make those determinations later on. And so, I suppose it'll become a more pressing question if we get closer to the trade deadline, if Ottawa doesn't turn things around with this coaching change, how they approach that scenario. But, the truth of the matter is, and look, I think we all think these are good players, talented players that have signed these deals. I mean, the fact they're locked up could be a good thing. If under a new coach, you can get them playing in a different way, maybe augment the group with some additions, maybe bring in a little bit more leadership to the team. But, I think at this point in time, everything has to be on the table. It's just you're not typically trading away players that have 5 years left on their deal, even if they're young, skilled players the way they have. I think that there's going to be a little bit of patience given to those core pieces.
CJ, what's the best case scenario for this team for the rest of the year? Like, they're going to have to play at a pretty significant clip here in order to put themselves in a position to make the playoffs. Like a .650 winning percentage. They have the worst goaltending in the league when you look at the combined stats. Like, yeah, you make a coaching change. I'm just not sure what's going to change as far as the on-ice product when you can't get a save when you need it.
Well, I think hopefully you're looking for better defensive play in front of the goaltenders, which might make the job easier. Obviously, I think best case scenario is playing a lot of competitive games, winning games. I don't know if they can get back into even something that looks like a playoff chase come the stretch drive, but I think that has to at least be in the back of the mind. And to answer Hayes' original question now, I mean, that's probably why you make a change now. No, those of us at our job could sit here with hindsight and say you should have done it a month ago. You should have seen where this is going, and nothing's improved in that month. But I really do believe they were sincere in wanting to give DJ Smith a chance to right the ship. But there's still a fair bit left in Sen's schedule. It's going to be difficult for them down the stretch. More than likely, this is probably another sort of quote-unquote lost season, but I think you still have to try to hope and build and become as winning of a team as you can from this point forward.
With Chris Johnston, our TSN hockey insider, so we've been putting a board up on TSN4 about all the coaching turnover in the country, where Sheldon Keefe is the longest tenured coach of all 7 Canadian teams by a fair amount. I mean, he was hired in November of 2019. Marty St. Louis came into Montreal February of 2022. And since then, you've had Bonus in Winnipeg, Tocchet in Vancouver, Huska in Calgary, Knobloch in Edmonton, and now Martin obviously taking over on the interim. And there have been other coaches in between that. Ducharme in Montreal, Woodcroft in Edmonton. Lots of turnover up here. Like, do you have a theory on why it's been such a consistent carousel in Canada?
I mean, I don't want to look past the obvious. I mean, I think these teams are under a higher degree of scrutiny. And in some of those cases, obviously, there's pretty elevated expectations. And, I'm thinking of Edmonton specifically, but even Vancouver to some degree. I mean, we're seeing that team break through this year and have a really nice run going. But, there was a couple coaches in recent seasons before that with Bruce Boudreau coming in and then Tocchet, where the Canucks didn't meet those expectations. And so I think that has to be a big part of it. And I don't know that it's just a trend only in Canada either. I mean, the number of coaches that have been turned over around the league is usually at a pretty alarming rate. I know last season was kind of an outlier, but just because so many coaches have been fired the year before that, I think it was 10 or 11 the season before that. And so, I think the average lifespan of a head coach is about 2.5 years in the NHL these days. And so, sometimes to get to that average, some coaches unfortunately don't last quite that long. I mean, DJ Smith, when all is said and done, probably got a little bit longer than could be expected, which is just underlines how crazy the job can be.
Well, and then you get to the biggest, loudest, craziest market of them all, and there's Sheldon Keefe, who's been here for 4 years. And, there have been a couple of flare-ups during the regular season over that tenure, including, COVID, which hit, so he literally didn't coach for a while. But a couple of poor starts where they allowed him to coach his way out of it, the players to play their way out of it. It was the right move in the end because, they'd finished with 112 points, 115 points. Really, it's the playoffs where it gets loudest, and Shanahan and company have decided we're going to let it cool down and we're going to bring him back. What do you make of that, CJ? Like, is that Shanahan and the Leafs trying to buck the trend? You talk about consistency. The players have been here consistently. Keefe's been here again for 4 years. Not that that's an eternity. But what do you make of the Leafs' approach to all this, considering what else is happening in the country?
Well, I think you almost have to break it into two parts, right? I mean, obviously there was a pretty close connection between Sheldon Keefe and Kyle Dubas, and they developed a lot of belief and trust in each other, and so I can understand in that case, why Dubas was inclined to stay loyal and to give him more opportunities. Maybe when some of those playoff series didn't go the way the organization wanted. What was interesting in these last few months is Sheldon Keefe essentially had to interview for his own job when Brad Treliving took over, and managed not only to do enough. I believe it was 17 hours of meetings over a couple of days that they had to stay in the position, but he got an extension last summer, and I think in the final analysis, I suppose we'll probably measure Sheldon Keefe's effectiveness by what happens in the playoffs, but as a regular season head coach, very few have been better in terms of the way that they've gotten their teams to play with the points they put up. And, the Leafs, again, despite kind of some early ups and downs and obviously the injury issues that have hit them are in a pretty good position now under Keefe. So, I don't know if they set out to buck the trend, but, I think that they recognize they have a really strong, still pretty young head coach there. And I don't know how long that leash lasts if it's not a better playoff result this time around. But, when you get 112 and 115 points, it's tough to move on from a guy.
CJ, what'd you make of that performance on Saturday night from the Pens with Kyle Dubas returning to Toronto for the first time?
Well, I think there's reason for concern, especially with their defensive play. I mean, it's the rare 7-0 game where you kind of come away from it thinking it could have been worse with some of the posts the Leafs had, and obviously other odd man rushes and the like that were stopped by the goaltenders for Pittsburgh. And it's an interesting season there. Not only is it Kyle Dubas' first year, making decisions at the top of the hockey operations department, but obviously we're getting down to the waning years of what's left of Sidney Crosby and Evgeny Malkin and Chris Letang, kind of legacy players. And I think it'd be very interesting to see how Dubas proceeds if things don't turn around. If, a month from now, there's still 5 or 6 or more points out of a playoff spot, I could see a case to try to retool on the fly, but at the same time, when you have those players, it's a tough thing to do because obviously they don't know how many years they got left, and they want to be playing playoff games and not. They don't have much interest in the draft picks she might be getting back at the deadline. So, I think it's been a tough run of late for Pittsburgh. I know they got the win in the shootout in Montreal, but they really have not been playing too well, and they're under the gun there to try to turn this thing around because Dubas has said by the All-Star break he was hoping to have some clarity on what direction he wants to go with the roster.
Man, that's going to be tough for him to spin it the opposite way. I mean, you've just acquired Carlson. You just acquired Smith. You signed a bunch of guys, Tristan Jarry among others, and you kind of locked in. Guys with term.
That's the difference here in Toronto. Like Treliving brought in guys on 1-year deals.
Right.
Show me on 1 year. See, and then we'll see where
Noel Acciari, who's been banged up and not even playing, gave him term. Like what could Pittsburgh possibly expect to get or possibly do other than just hope it's going to work out?
Well, I think what they'll do as long as they can is change the pieces around those 3 players I mentioned. I don't think they'll. I'd be surprised to see them go for a full-scale rebuild like we've seen San Jose do, where they're trading away, some of their real iconic pieces. And so what could they do at this deadline? I mean, Jake Gensel doesn't have a contract beyond this year. I'm not saying they're going to trade him, but that would be a piece that you could maybe move. I think you can get a pretty decent return. I think Riley Smith could be a name you hear out there. I mean, look at it. I'm not saying it's easy. It's a tough job that Kyle signed up for because, I mean, they've just spent 15 years as an organization trading away all of their meaningful draft picks, going for Stanley Cups. And, I mean, they were fortunate to win 3 of them. I think it was a good strategy while they were doing it, but now the back end isn't necessarily going to be pretty. And from my understanding, anyone who went in there, interviewing for that job before Dubas got it, the message was pretty clear at the ownership level that they weren't looking for a rebuild. So I don't think it's going to be a full-scale teardown, but, he's probably going to have to get creative, just trying to swap some pieces out, opening up maybe some, financial freedom with the cap going up and maybe be a player in free agency next year and just do what you can to make that roster as competitive as possible.
Yeah, I said earlier this hour, I envy the career arc of Dubas. And I'm not saying this disparagingly, this is true. He was literally a water boy in Sault Ste. Marie, growing up around the team. And then he's the GM, then the assistant GM in Toronto. Then he takes over for Lou Lamoriello. And then I think he was butting heads with Shanahan. I think he overplayed his hand. but he was also probably chasing more power, more money, and a bigger title, and he got it. And then he wakes up in Pittsburgh, and it's like, all right, I'm the president. I've anointed myself the GM, but I'm stuck. Like, you got the titles, but that team, I don't think they have a chance. Like, they're done. Like, their players, they're too old. They're too slow.
Goalie's not good enough. Goalie's not great. To him this offseason.
Yeah. Like, it's quick, man. And even Mike Sullivan, who he inherited as a coach, I don't know. Is he going to keep Sullivan?
Dude, Sully in a game like that after the first period would have gone, like, berserk in the room after. And then, I don't know, I kind of watched Sully that night. I'm like, I don't know, man. He was
tame after.
Maybe
it's humbling.
Like, maybe Sully's kind of seen enough of that, too. And, CJ, I don't know, like, how they're going to move on from guys. They don't have anything in the pipeline. It's almost like they need to bottom out for 3-4 years and start picking in the top 5 and pick high in the second round, third round, because I don't know how else you do it if you're them.
Oof. Good luck.
Well, and here's the other thing. Like, obviously, Kyle got a 7-year deal, which is unusual. I mean, that's a great amount of security for him and his family. But a rebuild sometimes takes longer than 7 years, and they haven't even really started a rebuild. So, I think where it gets difficult is if you don't get any sort of pop here on the front end of your deal while you're trying to still be competitive with the team. I mean, you might get knee deep into the rebuild, whatever that looks like, and never be around in time to see the fruits of it. I mean, that's just the reality. Look at how long Detroit, have spent out of the playoffs. It's been a long time since Ken Holland left there. I mean, he's on his 5th year in Edmonton already. And, I just think that's the real difficulty. And, with Sullivan, his contract hasn't even kicked in yet. He's got an extension that starts next season.
Wow.
And so I don't even know how you think about removing him as head coach when he's got 3 years at big money starting next year. I think you're kind of stuck together right now and making the best of it. And look at, obviously, every team lays an egg a couple times for a season. But if they start getting beaten routinely as badly as they did, on Saturday, the atmosphere on the team will be terrible too. So, I think it's a real important point right now for Pittsburgh as they head home. They play Minnesota, I believe, tonight. I mean, to turn this around quickly, because otherwise it won't be just us noticing what's going on there.
Thank you, CJ. We'll do it again soon.
All right. Talk soon, guys.
Chris Johnston, our TSN Hockey Insider. You referenced the Mike Babcock losing in Vegas, going to Arizona and being let go. DJ Smith losing in Vegas, going to Arizona and let go. Prior to that loss by Babcock in Vegas, the Leafs were in Pittsburgh on the Saturday night.
No.
And they got crushed.
Was that the Kaskasuo game?
I think it was like 6 or 7-0. And I was thinking of that on Saturday. I'm like, Dubas was watching that in Pittsburgh saying he's out. This guy will fly him to Vegas. He can coach in Vegas, but he's done. I'm not saying that will directly happen with Sullivan. Again, Sullivan's won cups. Sullivan was, by all accounts, involved in the courting of Dubas to bring him in.
Yeah.
But I'm watching that on Saturday. I'm like, that's got Babcock, Leafs, and Pittsburgh vibes to it. Like, just ugly, dejected. Players don't look like they're into it. A mess.
I remember Sullivan was the assistant with Torts in Vancouver. They both got fired. Sully got the AHL job in Wilkes-Barre. I think the coach at the time in Pittsburgh was Mike Johnston. Remember that guy?
Yep.
He got fired. Sully took over. They went like 0-4. They were brutal. Then they won the cup.
And they just took off back-to-back cups.
And it was just like, they caught lightning in a bottle. Like, legendary performance.
Amazing.
For 2 years,
all right, more on the Leafs as we go on this afternoon. Martin Jones, again, was really good the other night. Matthews back on the ice today. Brody back on the ice today. The Rangers in town tomorrow. That's a big game, so we'll start looking ahead to that. Raptors in action tonight. Monday nighter tonight. Eagles taking on the Seahawks. And Luke Wilson will be in studio in about 10 to 15 minutes explaining what's going on with Team Owen Wilson. Hayes and Bro are chugging. Overdrive continues. TSN 1050 and on the TSN app. All right, Luke Wilson in studio in about 10 minutes. Monday nighter tonight, Eagles, Seahawks. Cowboys got just punked by the Bills yesterday. We'll get into that, among other things, with Luke. Raptors in action tonight. Big favorites against Charlotte, but the champs are in town on Wednesday. The Raptors are taking on Denver on Wednesday. So if you listen to Overdrive and First Up tomorrow, you'll have a chance to win a pair of tickets to the game. And it's always awesome down at Scotiabank around the holidays. I find Leaf games, Raptor games, there's just a lot of buzz downtown. There's a lot of people that are in the festive spirit.
Little Christmas market beforehand.
Yes.
Mosey on over to the game.
The old Christmas lunch that never leads to people going back to the office.
Yeah.
Right? It's always, we'll go for lunch around 1 or 2. We'll come back. Never. but they end up at the Raptors game.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
So it's usually a pretty fun atmosphere. So we're giving away tickets on First Up tomorrow and on OverDrive. We'll see what the Raptors have in store. It got ugly again on Friday. But not Detroit Pistons ugly. 23 games in a row, and they're getting crushed. Like, you look at the standings, it's almost sad to look at it, where the bottom of the standings in the NBA, because every on TSN.ca, ESPN, whatever, generally there's a lost streak. And the worst teams in the league, it's lost 2 in a row, lost 3 in a row, lost 4 in a row. And then Detroit, it's L23.
Outrageous.
L23.
Hard to do if you tried.
Very tough.
Yeah.
And they just hired a new coach and gave him a ton of money. Monty Williams is supposed to come in there and change things. He's got no answers. They're a mess. So it can get bad at times, but it's not Detroit Pistons bad.
No, that's real
right?
bad.
And the Lions, I think people in that market are pretty happy because the Lions won over the weekend. So more on that with Luke into the next hour. More on the Leafs. Big win on Saturday night. Start teeing up Leafs Rangers tomorrow night. DJ Smith fired in Ottawa. More on that throughout the afternoon. Frankie's in here. I'm Bryan Hayes. OverDrive continues. TSN 1050 and on TSN 4.